Elite Facts presents
7 Villains from History.
7.
Griselda Blanco. As ingenious as she was ruthless, Griselda Blanco was the Colombian drug lord you've probably never heard of. Her life of crime started early at the age of 11, when she aimed high and had a go at kidnapping. The tale goes that she kidnapped an infant child from a wealthy family in a well-off neighborhood near her own. When the family couldn't pay the ransom, she proved she meant business and shot the hostage child dead. At the age of 13, she became a pickpocket and was a looter in Medellin until the age of 20. Her criminal career took a step up when she got involved with the Medellin drug cartel, which you may know as the cartel Pablo Escobar was involved with. Her drug career started with what otherwise might have sounded like a poor girl taking an entrepreneurial step out of poverty when she opened a lingerie store. Her trick was manufacturing lingerie with special compartments that could hold drugs. This meant she had given the cartel a number of sexy smugglers who could move cocaine undetected in their unmentionables. Her move to Miami in the 1980s saw her become a queen of crime, and she ruled with an iron fist over the criminal underworld. U.S. law enforcement pointed to Blanco as one of the primary reasons why Miami became the cocaine capital of the world. Accounts vary, but she's responsible for somewhere between 40 and 250 assassinations, and she's credited with the invention of the motorcycle assassination. Eventually, she was arrested, but she was only convicted of 3 murders, and she got a lighter sentence than expected due to a phone sex scandal involving key witnesses. When she eventually got out of prison, she was gunned down, perhaps ironically, by a motorcycle-riding assassin.
6.
Ivan the Terrible. With this Russian czar, the clue is in his name. Just how villainous Ivan really was is a debate probably best left to historians and ethicists. But the fact remains that Ivan did do some pretty terrible things during his reign over Russia. The declaration of the Oprichnina, or absolute monarchy, and the creation of his Oprichniki, his personal guard and enforcers, brought about some harsh times for the Russian people. The Oprichniki were granted large amounts of land, which was often simply taken from the Russian peasantry, making the Oprichniki the new landlords. Rents under their control went so high that tenants were forced to pay in 1 year what they would have otherwise paid in 10. This caused many peasants to flee, causing grain shortages, which screwed up the Russian economy. The nobles were not safe from Ivan's terrible reign either. They were, in fact, the main targets of his Oprichniki. Many nobles were executed or exiled on Ivan's orders, but Ivan had reasons for his hatred of the noble clans. He blamed them for poisoning his wife, Anastasia, and had not been mentally stable since. The defection of one of his key advisors, Andrzej Kurbski, to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth caused Ivan further emotional trauma and increased his distrust of the Russian nobles. It also didn't help that the nobles had tried to use Ivan when he was young, so he really did have a vendetta against them. But his massacre of the people of Veliky Novgorod in 1570 was an act of pure cruelty. Paranoid that the people of Novgorod would defect to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the same way that Andrzej had before, Ivan sent the Oprichniki to the town. They killed everyone they could and even butchered those taking shelter in the church. Modern estimates put the death toll at around 12,000. It is worth pointing out that in Russian, Ivan is known instead as Ivan the Fearsome or Formidable. His reign did see the growth of the Russian Empire southward, and in Russia, his legacy is much more than that of a straight-up villain.
5.
Pope Innocent VII. What's this? A pope on our list of historic villains? How is this possible? Surely being a good person is a prerequisite to becoming the pope. Well, history has actually had a few popes of questionable benevolence, and Pope Innocent VII is one who really didn't live up to his name. At least legend has it that he didn't. Pope Innocent VII was famous for his condemnations of witchcraft and roused inquisitions against it. But for someone so against all things witchcraft, Innocent is accused of an act of despicable villainy straight out of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale, drinking the blood of children. As Pope Innocent VII grew old and his health began to fail, he found himself running a high fever and drifting in and out of comas. Doctors, seeing how ill the Pope was, rallied to heal him, and the cure they came up with? The blood of children. Doctors brought 3 10-year-old boys to the Vatican and drew so much blood from them that all 3 of them died. The doctors carried on regardless and made the Pope a draught of the children's blood for him to drink, which he did. Of course, the blood of dead children didn't do anything to help Pope Innocent, and he died several days later. Okay, perhaps this isn't really enough to damn Pope Innocent VII as a villain of history, unless maybe drinking the blood somehow turned him into an evil vampire pope, but a pope so against witchcraft probably should have known better than to drink the blood of children. That act alone is pretty horrific. Perhaps a pope like Pope Alexander VI is more worthy of the title villain, being that he was a member of the controlling mafia-like Borgia family and whose son apparently made prostitutes fight over chestnuts in the papal palace.
4.
Phallaris of Acragas. Phallaris of Acragas is noted for having been the rather effective ruler of the city-state of Acragas, in what is now Agrigento in Sicily. Ruling from 570 to 554 BC, he built fine temples for the city, improved the whaler supply, and even oversaw the construction of the city's magnificent walls, bringing prosperity to the city. But his efficiency quickly became tyranny, and he eventually turned sadistic and cruel. Phallaris had a habit of executing a lot of people, and his preferred method of doing so was the stuff of nightmares. An Athenian artist by the name of Perillos devised an execution device for Phallaris called the Brazen Bull. What might otherwise appear as a bronze bull statue was actually a means of cruel death. The idea was that the victim would be locked up in a chamber inside the body of the bronze bull, and a fire would be lit beneath the bull. The bull would slowly heat up, gradually roasting the unfortunate soul trapped inside with unbearable heat. To add to this horror show, an acoustic tube was linked up between the roasting chamber and the bull's mouth. This meant that the screams of the victim would come out of the bull's mouth like a deep, hellish mooing. Phallaris, keen to see his dreadful toy in action, promptly had Perillos thrown inside. It worked as advertised, and Phallaris had Perillos removed from the bull before he died, only to then have him thrown off of a cliff. For the remainder of his reign thereafter, Phallaris continued to execute many people by this torturous means until he was eventually overthrown. When he was deposed, karma bit back at Phallaris hard as he was thrown inside the bull and roasted. It's also worth noting that Phallaris was accused of eating babies, just in case you weren't already sold on him being a villain.
3.
Henry Morton Stanley. The life of a journalist is not one synonymous with villainy, unless of course you count phone hacking and breaking codes of ethics for the sake of a little extra money from time to time. But the occasional sketchy practices of a few of today's journalists ain't got nothing on the despicable actions of Henry Morton Stanley. How about the violent and cruel oppression of the people of the Congo for sketchy journalist practices? Henry Morton Stanley made a name for himself when he went on an expedition into Africa to find the explorer and missionary Dr. Livingstone, who had been missing in Central Africa for 6 years. Stanley was successful in this quest and is credited with the immortal line, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" upon finding the doctor. Because of the success of this quest, he earned a reputation as being a bit of an expert on Africa and was sent back by the Daily Telegraph to map the regions around the Congo River and the Central African lakes. His career in journalism saw him become the premier explorer of Africa, so it was not long before he was approached by King Leopold II of Belgium to help him out with what amounted to be a real-life conspiracy of terrible cruelty. The Belgian king had organized a private holding company in the Congo that was disguised as a philanthropic and scientific organization. Stanley oversaw the rule of the Congo for the king, which included exploiting the land for ivory and notably rubber. He used forced labor, and some estimates put the number of Congolese dead at 15 million. Stanley was very much personally involved, being accused by an associate of, quote, shooting Negroes as if they were monkeys, and murdering at least a dozen pygmy people, including children who had been caught stealing vegetables.
2.
Jameson. It's been said that if you want to be a villain numero uno, you have to have sent a superhero packing. However, surely feeding a little girl to cannibals for the sake of curiosity is a much stronger villain qualification. Jameson was the young and wealthy heir to an Irish whiskey empire. He was the stereotypical spoiled rich kid. He drank the finest teas, enjoyed exotic hunting trips, and wasted his money on frivolous things. For Jameson, one thing he treated frivolously was the life of an 11-year-old girl. In the age when imperialism was at its darkest in Africa, Jameson made like H.M. Stanley and headed to the Congo to get a look at the so-called savage natives. One night, Jameson and his interpreter were discussing cannibalism, and he became fascinated by the idea of it. Jameson had the interpreter consult the local chiefs about cannibalism on his behalf, and they agreed to show Jameson what cannibalism was all about. However, the tribesmen who had agreed to Jameson's request were lacking any volunteers to be eaten, so Jameson pulled a classic rich boy move and simply threw money at the problem to get his way. Well, actually it was cloth, not money, but Jameson found an 11-year-old slave girl and bought her for the sum of 6 handkerchiefs worth of cloth. He then handed the girl over to the cannibals, who killed and dismembered her while Jameson watched with his sketchbook in hand. Some accounts claim he was also present as the cannibals cooked and feasted on the remains.
1.
King John. King John of England's legacy has been lasting. He's the archetypical villainous king. King John's reign was so ridiculously cruel at times that his downfall led to the enshrining of the basic principles of the law in the modern free world. Petty, petulant, and short-tempered, King John's reign was a blight on England. He was very much a real-life Joffrey Baratheon. As a child, it is said that he once lost a game of chess to a noble's son named Fulk Fitzwarren. Being a sore loser, the then Prince John attacked Fulk and tried to have him killed before being restrained. It's said that John retained his animosity towards Fulk into his reign as king, and later stripped Fulk of his castle at Whittington on the Welsh border, as well as the rest of his lands, entirely out of spite. Fulk Fitzwarren is said to have then gone into open rebellion against the king and became an outlaw along with a few of his loyal men. The tales of Fulk Fitzwarren are often credited as the inspiration for Robin Hood. Another one of King John's nasty habits was kidnapping the wives of nobles that he didn't like and occasionally throwing their families into pits. Even before he was crowned king, he ruled in his brother's stead, the heroic Richard the Lionheart, who was off crusading. During this time, John ran the country into debt and lost England's lands in Normandy to the French. John's decadent lifestyle and many affairs with the wives of nobles caused him to have a number of disputes with the church, leading to his excommunication by the Pope. Eventually, the barons of England got so sick and tired of John's rule that they started a mass rebellion, which forced King John to agree to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which limited the power of monarchs and guaranteed basic freedoms. John, being a spoiled brat who was used to getting his own way, tried to later nullify the Magna Carta. This time, the barons not only rebelled, they went so far as to invite the King of France to replace John. King John tried in vain to stop the rebellion, and he became ill and died while marching between battles, with some accounts suggesting that he was poisoned. With John dead, the barons united behind his young son Henry and drove out the French king, who was still expecting to be made King of England. It's because of John's many cruelties and screw-ups that there has never been another King of England named John.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.